right. A fun morning coffee chat here this morning on a podcast. Your host, Stephen Maxted. And today we have a special guest, Royden Brousseau, conservative candidate for Winnipeg South Centre. And Royden's background is incredibly diverse. Spent some time out west in resources and some time in finance, some big projects, big picture stuff for Canada. And now he's returned, I guess, back to home base, I'll say, Royden, is your intro here and in Winnipeg and trying to make a difference and impact on some big picture stuff for Canada ultimately. And thanks for making time to be on here this morning. Excited to have you on. We've talked a little bit in politics in the podcast, and this is going to be a little bit more, so to say, head on in terms of a conversation. So I'm excited to have you on here today. So thanks for making the time and having a coffee with me. So how are you doing today?
Just lovely. Yeah, looking forward to this.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so maybe just building on that background. I mean,
yes.
I grew up here in Winnipeg South Centre, and I went to local elementary schools, Rockwood and Robert H. My career did take me away. My first degree was in mining engineering, and so they don't put mines in convenient places or big cities.
Yeah.
And so my first role was in Red Lake in northwestern Ontario, about 5 hours northeast of here, but it was still close.
Cool.
And I was there because I wanted to be in Winnipeg. And I wanted to hang out on Corda. And my wife was living in the neighborhood at the time. And so, I mean, we were just dating then, but it was an opportunity for me to come home and get to know her. And and then, being a young person in his early 20s working in mining, I think we were both looking for something a little more metropolitan. And so my career took me to building a larger mine, a $23 billion project here in Canada that employed folks from across the country. And they were great jobs for folks, whether they came from Newfoundland, where the fishery had collapsed, or whether they came from New Brunswick, where mines had closed there, or northwestern Ontario, where you'd seen pulp and paper sector hollowed out, and so, or Manitobans who were just looking for great paychecks so that they could support their families and take their kids on holiday. And so we needed a lot of that. And some of that opportunity has dwindled over the last decade. After that, I went and I did an MBA, and I got into financing some of these large projects. My clients were the kinds of folks that wanted to build meaningful Canadian infrastructure, and they were, one of those clients was Enbridge, and they wanted to build a pipeline to the West Coast, to be able to get Canadian resources to global markets. And that project specifically, Northern Gateway, Trudeau kiboshed specifically. And so it was heartbreaking to see that opportunity lost. I think, Indigenous communities along the right of way also owned a 10% stake in that project. So, it was a step back for, Northern communities. It was a step back for economic reconciliation in this country. And that only continued. Working in that finance role, I saw project after project get canceled, particularly after the Liberals' Bill C-69 was introduced. So another client of mine was TransCanada, who became TC Energy because Canada became a bad place to do business. So, they had proposed Energy East, which was a project to leverage an existing right-of-way with an existing pipeline, to get our resources to both the eastern part of Canada, because there is no oil pipeline to the eastern part of Canada right now. The Sarnia refining complex, to get there, you have to go through the States. And so, but this pipeline would have also allowed us to get all the way to St. John's, where Canada's largest refinery is.
Interesting.
And allow us to get, again, access to global markets. So both, these two projects in particular, they would have allowed us to be less dependent on the States. But with the cancellation of these and the mothballing of, nearly 20 LNG projects in this country, We are more beholden to the States than ever. All of our resources flow south. And, and that's the Liberals doing. Not only that, our per capita GDP is in the same place it was when the Liberals started. So there hasn't been meaningful growth for Canadians. While at the same time, housing prices have doubled, and our groceries rose 37% more quickly than they did in the States. And so, what we're hearing at the door is folks are concerned about affordability, both on, housing and their basic needs. And they're concerned about a lack of opportunity in this country. We've unfortunately, this Liberal government has put a cap on prosperity. And I want to be part of a government that can say yes to opportunity and yes to jobs for Canadians, and not put government dough into these projects, but encourage the private sector to invest in Canada again. We've seen $500 billion flow south out of this country, and it's left Canadians poorer.
Oh, you definitely, I guess, preaching to the choir, Royden, because we talk with lots of business owners on this podcast, and behind, kind of like we'll say before, maybe even during, and definitely after the episode, some of the best parts of the conversation do happen kind of offline, unfortunately. I wish we did record all of them, but some of it's a little bit more sensitive about what they've been sharing with us specifically. And we've been running this podcast for a few years now. We're on season 3. I think it's a really highlighted example of many different industries that we work in, whether it be in a weird way, local DJs, everyone into like bigger corporate operations, to, restaurants, grocery stores. And over time, keeping up with those relationships with folks, they've definitely highlighted very similar things to what you're saying. And I think it truly is a trickle effect, because once those things are gone from our economy, they're not really coming back, or it's going to take such a leg to then come back and have that positive impact, right? Because then it's someone's whatever family, mom, dad, whoever it is in the family, making that bigger buck on those projects. That's trickling down to be able to pay for education, sports, a better livelihood overall. And then that gets gone. It's like, hey, what's balancing that out at the end of the day? Because it's certainly not government payments.
Well, and I mean, I think if you canceled, I think we could move pretty quickly, because there still is an interest in getting things done. One that is closer to home is, getting something going on the shores of Hudson's Bay. And Wab Kinew, our own premier, was entertaining a delegation from Europe just last week, and he was talking about a second port in Hudson's Bay. And this is something that Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, has been beating the drum on as well. Is, there is an interest in some of these projects. All we need is a regulatory framework to allow companies to say, to hit the go button. There is interest, and I think that once you start spooling up that interest, then you begin employing people in the project world. You begin employing engineers. You begin employing your regulatory consultants. You begin working with Indigenous communities. The legal world gets spooled up on putting everything together. The environmental world gets going, because we can develop projects responsibly in Canada. And we had the right framework to do it. And so I think that, once that engine starts going, you can do things pretty quickly. And then, maybe you start by pushing in a road. You start by pushing in, just so that you can get boots on the ground and put people where you need them to be, even to do some of the pre-work. And so I think that adds economic value. So if somebody wanted to, let's take LNG, for example. If somebody wanted to put an LNG facility on the shores of Hudson's Bay, then that could be a $20 or $30 billion investment here in Manitoba. And why wouldn't we say yes to something like that?
Yeah.
That would help lift folks up and really get things rocking again here. And I think that something like that might take some time, the facility itself, but but the economic activity begins earlier because of all the people involved in a project like that. And if we commit to permitting projects on a timely basis, then I think we can move pretty quickly.
Awesome.
it would also allow us to go around the states. I mean, the wonderful thing about Hudson's Bay is it's only a 10-day sail from Hamburg, Germany.
Right.
Hamburg is also a 10-day sail from St. John, New Brunswick, just, the way the globe is shaped. And
Yes.
so, and it, if we did something like that, it also means, well, hey, we don't have to push a pipeline all the way through Ontario, all the way
Right.
through Quebec, right? And so it's, it might be a little more economically feasible. And I think the other ancillary benefits of this are that, well, if you had a hyper economic project like LNG, where, our gas is inexpensive in Canada and it's much more expensive in Europe. And so there's the economic arbitrage to, to pave the way for a big project in year-round ice breaking. And with year-round ice breaking, we could also start shipping grain and potash and other commodities out of Manitoba, and we could put our province back on the map as a transportation hub, the way it was in
Right.
the 1920s.
Yeah, we were really truly sorry, like a grain. It was more agricultural focused at the time, right? We were supposed to be like the booming the city that happened, and I believe it was something with like Chicago and grain exchange or something that didn't end up coming our way at some point in history. That's a bad, maybe I do this all the time on the podcast. I don't know all the facts, but I remember parts of stories because I used to work in grain and actually out at the Port of Churchill, and there was huge opportunity up there. A very limited experience doing so, but it was a contract and an experience that a lot of folks wouldn't have had. So I'm very familiar with all of that, and folks should definitely explore understanding that a little bit more about how beneficial that could be to specifically here in Manitoba. I think you're right. You definitely nailed it. There could be a quick turnaround. If we really want to get something done, we can, whether it be a reference from a few years ago when we were able to pause the economy, which turned out not to be a good thing, but that happened very quick because we wanted it to happen or needed it to happen kind of thing. So I think you're right. Things could, flip a switch and be all jets going the other way, as it were.
Well,
Right.
and it's not just, I mean, there still are government opportunities. I think broadly.
Yeah.
I mean, I meet very few Canadians who aren't interested in, supporting our military, right?
Yeah.
That was a double negative, but I think there's broad support to invest in Canadian armed forces. And one of the conservative platforms there is to, build a base in Churchill. And during the Cold War, the Americans actually helped us build one in Churchill, and it was dismantled afterwards. But Poilievre is proposing a naval port in Churchill. So again, if and a home for our Arctic icebreakers, that we want to invest in. And so again, you also have government dollars flowing back into this province, which, will again stand to boost the economy and get things moving here, while working with northern municipalities and First Nation communities here in Manitoba. Right now, I mean, they own Arctic Gateway, which in turn owns the railway to Churchill and the Port of Churchill, which is, there's room to include northern communities in Manitoba in some of this economic development, so that dollars are flowing back to those communities, so that there are job opportunities for folks at home, right? So, I mean, hey, you might need to travel for work, but a lot of Canadians do. But you're not, you don't have to come to the big city looking for opportunity. And I think that would, anyways, I want to get this country moving again, and that's why I'm.
No, 100%. And I mean, people are now, I think more than ever, conversations kind of quietly happening behind the scenes are exploring opportunities, different parts of Canada or outside of Canada, even with certain uncertainty kind of brewing at this time. And until we know how outcome goes, I think that's a real conversation of wanting to keep it home. For a lot of folks, they don't want to move. They love this country, but they're feeling the pressure because there's not opportunities here. So I think you really nailed home a good point of exploring, expanding, and actually making the country a powerhouse again. Now, bring it back to like the local constituency, if you will, right? Because I know one of the things that I've seen on your social medias and things that you've shared online are around listening to folks and hearing their voices and what they've been giving for feedback. So what have they been saying to you when you've been going to doors and spending time asking them what's important to them?
Well, and I think it's applicable not only to this riding, but nationally. And so
Yeah.
we've been really fortunate to have, Polyev as a leader, because he's taken a real grassroots approach to this campaign, which began with his leadership race, 3 or 4 years ago. And he's been hosting these rallies. And after every rally, he stands there and listens to Canadians for hours. Last time I saw him in Winnipeg, he stood there for 4.5 hours listening to Canadians about what mattered to them. And not mucky mucks, not bigwigs or CEOs, but regular folks like you and me, who are, struggling to keep food on the table, who are seeing their rents rise, and they're worried about, how they're going to cover costs for their family, or who have seen, the deteriorating state of our downtowns, folks who have been the victims of crime. And so that's, it's this listening to people that has been the basis for our platform, to focus on affordability, to focus on crime, to focus on stemming inflation. And so and to focus on opportunity, building this country up. And so the things that I'm hearing at the door are, part and parcel with that. The number one issue that I hear is healthcare. And the Conservatives have a plan to invest meaningfully in healthcare. We want to help. We want to work with the provinces to create a Blue Seal program so that it's easier for newcomers to the country to get into the business. And obviously, that does take a lot of cooperation, because you want to make sure that the folks involved in our healthcare are, up to standards. And so it probably means testing and shadowing and, bringing those folks along a journey to the point where they can be integrated into our system. And we've got a plan for that. We want to add doctors and nurses, because what we're hearing is, wait times are atrocious. And so we want to support Canadians in that effort. The other interesting thing on healthcare is we also are committed to adding a meaningful addictions piece to Canadian healthcare. And so in Canada, we've lost 50,000 people to addictions over the last decade. And you think about the number of families that impacts. It's 50,000 people that are gone, but the reach or the impact that those folks have, and and their journey through addiction must be awful. And so we want to help 50,000 Canadians struggling with addiction over the next 4 years. We need to step into this business as a country, because it's not just Winnipeg's downtown, it's downtowns across the country. It's small towns that are being hollowed out by by crime, addiction, issues with mental health. And so we want to help folks. We want to, and there are bright spots here in Manitoba, like the Brousseau Center, that we can use as a model. So that's something I'm really proud of in terms of our platform. The other issues that I hear at the door again are crime, and the Liberals' revolving door policies have unleashed a crime wave. Violent crime is up 50% in this country since the Liberals began. Bill C-75, mandates that folks need to be released quickly on the least onerous conditions. Every police officer that I've met on this political journey, and I've been doing this for a year now, every police officer that I've met is a Conservative, because they want to be empowered to do their job. It's awful if they arrest somebody and they're trying to protect our community, and that individual is back on the street hours later and is committing crime the next day. And so, we need to, it's not a matter of more police officers. It's a matter of giving police officers the tools to do their job, because right now their hands are tied. And then so other, outside of those two issues, I'd say then you get into affordability. You get into, I meet folks who are struggling, or older generations who are concerned about their children. I met a woman a couple of days ago. She has one son who's a police officer and another who's a firefighter. And she said, my boys have done everything right, and they're early in their career, but she's worried about them being able to afford a home. And, for folks that are supporting their community, homes shouldn't be out of reach.
Yeah.
Um, and then I'd say, I also meet a lot of folks who are concerned about where our government is spending money, and not being respectful of tax dollars. This
Yeah.
government, this liberal government, has spent $11 billion on gender initiatives in other countries. And, what value are we getting for that spending? What happens if we just
Mhm.
put $11 billion into the healthcare system and helped Canadians? Or
Yeah.
what happens if we just, doubled down on getting things going here at home? And so
Right.
anyways, I think there are a lot of folks who have seen, the corruption. Same with the green, the Liberals' green slush fund,
Right.
which shut down Parliament since October. We haven't had a functioning government since October, and and yet there are folks who want to give these guys a fourth chance,
Yeah.
and it's I'm having a tough time with that.
Yeah, it is tough to hear, and I'll maybe add just something into it. I have seen other comments online and try to keep an open mind all the way through, truly, about some things. But actually, close to home, we have some family that are, represent roles in different parts of, I guess, like policing, RCMP, and police officers over the years. And then more recently, I guess it's younger guys and gals that I'm buddies with that are on the force, and they're just tired of it. They're getting worn down. Yeah, they're getting paid well because they're working crazy hours and overtime. So part of it is they're not they don't mind that part of it, but at the same time, it's really frustrating because they are, and part of it is actually tied to addiction. In this one particular example of a gentleman who shared a story with me about having to sit in a hospital with a gentleman who was coming down off of a high, incredibly strong, given the substances he was on, had to sit there for like 12 hours. He had to like hand off on his shift because he'd gone over his hours to another pair of cops to come and sit with this gentleman in the hospital. So it's taking up space in the healthcare system instead of having treatment or spaces to maybe get help and maybe get off that. Not to say that that's not going to maybe happen the odd time, but it seems to be a pretty steady case. He said there was actually 3 folks that they had to sit there, and because they need 2 people per person, that's 6 cops sitting in a hospital in this example. And then that's not a good use of perhaps spending. And then the crime is the other part of it too, just to, share that they're just tired of it. Right. And eventually that leads to probably a not so healthy system at the end of the day either. People are getting worn down, they're going to quit their job. And then you don't have very good support when you actually need it, when you're getting someone shows up just to steal something because you don't have a very good policy on that. Right. Everyone's okay until it happens on their home base. So yeah, too bad to hear. There's what was I guess, how are you feeling about the race as we're kind of closing in here, I guess, and because you've been working on this for, I think, a bit of time building up to this, obviously, and how are you feeling out there, Royden?
Well, I was nominated a year ago, and so we have been knocking doors for a year. And
Mm.
it started as, a couple evenings a week and weekends. And I mean, that's when you're able to connect with folks at the door because they're home.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and, I've been able to attend a lot of events, and I always lead with what's important to you because I want to be a strong voice for our community in Ottawa. Um, and that's where I get a lot of the feedback.
Yeah.
Um, and the truth is, we are continuing to find an incredible level of support, more support in this riding than ever before. Each night that we've been out this week in the final week of an election, we're still finding hundreds and hundreds of supporters.
Yeah.
And I think that's, there are a lot of folks in this country who know that we need to change. So despite the polling, there is
Yeah.
support there. There's a, people understand um, that we need to make some materially different moves in this country, um, so that we can be resilient again, so that we can lift folks up, so that the government has the dough to help people.
Right.
And so I think there is support. We've also had more sign requests in this riding than ever before. And it's, in some cases there's a reluctance. I had one, I had, one young fellow who asked for a sign, and he took his down because his neighbors were being jerks, which is unfortunate. But he said,
Yeah.
I'm going to put it up this week and make sure, I'll get it back up.
Right.
And so that's unfortunate to see too. But
Yeah.
it's just the level of support, folks reaching out, And I've been pretty open. I mailed the whole constituency a card with my personal cell phone number on it. And I want to be the kind of guy who's approachable. And so people have been able to reach out. It's been a very open and transparent campaign. And I'm proud of that. And I really hope that we can make a change in this country.
Yeah, you make some great points there, and I think it's really important that you have gone door to door and met all these folks face to face, or as many as you can within there. You might be just bad timing on some of them of different days, but being able to do that for an entire year and truly get connected within the community at a very different level. I think you've always been very involved from the understanding of being from here and being connected to the folks locally and having a true feel for Winnipeg and Winnipeg South Center in this case. And I think it sounds like a fantastic thing that you're doing and providing service to the community already. And yeah, we wish you all the best here at A podcast. And seems like you're wanting to take this, riding in the right direction, ultimately.
I really am. I really feel. My wife and I lived elsewhere earlier in our careers, but we have 3 young children, and we wanted to move home to Winnipeg South Center because this is where our community is. And when we lived away, we were spending all our holiday getting back here. So we moved home to raise our kids here. And my daughter's school is a short walk, and it's a great community there. And the other thing that because I've had the chance to connect with so many people, there are really proud Winnipeggers and really proud Manitobans and really proud Canadians. Folks that are involved in the community, that are philanthropic, that give of both their time and resources, and they want to see the best for our city, our province, our country. And so that's been, because I get the opportunity to learn about issues that I didn't know existed. I spent a bunch of time working with the United Way, and that was the same. You learn, not only do you learn about the issues, but you learn about the way people are trying to fix them and solutions. And so I love when people bring solutions to problems, because it opens the door to making meaningful change.
Absolutely, it does. Royden, this is great. Is there anything else that you want to throw in the mix here that we maybe didn't cover? And this is a very standard way to ask the last question of the day kind of thing, as we're kind of heading off. But is there anything else that you want to throw out there that is on your mind that maybe we didn't cover?
You know what? The one thing that I think is worth consideration is comparing and contrasting the leaders of both parties. And so Poilievre has spent a career fighting for Canadians, and he's been a minister before, a minister of housing, where he did well in that portfolio, where housing was accessible. He has been the finance critic, where he called inflation. He called the damage that an intentionally inflationary carbon tax would cause, or that massive deficit spending would cause, right? You just have so many new dollars in our economy chasing the same number of goods, or, in a lot of cases, fewer goods, because we've been so anti-development under this Liberal government. So, he saw that coming. And this is contrasted with Carney, who said, inflation's a good thing. Well, it hasn't been. And I spoke a bit about how our platform is based on listening to Canadians and based on empathy for, the struggles that Canadians are having. And if folks are listening to this and they're saying, well, you know what, life's pretty good for me, that's wonderful. That's fantastic. But I'm asking them to empathize with all the Canadians for whom it isn't, because things are tough right now. They're tough for young people who are starting out, who want to find a good job, who want to be able to buy a house, who want to be able to build a family here, who want to be, a meaningful part of the community. And so, you compare our platform, which is based on hearing Canadians, to the Liberal leader who hasn't been here for 13 years, and I'm really afraid that Mr. Carney is out of touch. And I think that, his track record of moving one of Canada's largest corporations to the States is not a testament for confidence in this country. And it's a bad look. Stephen, if you or I wanted to be prime minister in a month, do you think we would be voting for and then advocating for moving one of our largest corporations to the States? No, we'd pound the table for this country. And so I just don't know how we can elect somebody who doesn't have our best interests at heart. And it's further compounded by, the fact that he hasn't even been paying taxes here. In those corporations, if he was a good Canadian, he'd be paying for things here at home. But instead, he's looking to offshore taxes. Right. Like, why are companies set up in a bike shop in Hamilton, Bermuda? Somebody should go to the bike shop with a camera and actually say, does this look like a head office? Right. And lastly, if we are mad at Trump for tariffs, then we should be furious at this Liberal government for its industrial carbon tax. Because while Canadians, I think, realize just how inflationary the carbon tax was, because we've been given a price at the pump temporarily, price break at the pump, our biggest employers haven't. And so if you're a steel manufacturer and you're paying this carbon tax in a carbon intensive industry, if you're a steel manufacturer, cement manufacturer, if you're in the aluminum space and you're still, if you're in the energy industry and you're still paying those taxes, not only are they going to get passed on to our consumers, but they risk jobs in those sectors. And so they're going to, this tax is going to continue to drive those jobs out of this country to jurisdictions that don't have them. Whereas the Conservative Party wants to do better for the environment and Canadians. And there's lots of room to do that. We can reduce global emissions. Section 6 of the Paris Climate Agreement, has a carve out for helping countries reduce global emissions. And if we get our clean natural gas around the world with half the emissions of coal, then we can make meaningful steps rather than just this shut down Canada agenda. Anyways,
no, that's fantastic, Royden.
I really think voters need to compare and contrast between an out of touch elitist with an anti-Canadian agenda, being Carney, and just a wholesome, empathetic, grassroots leader who is focused on making lives better here at home. Anyways, I really appreciate the time, Stephen. I really appreciate you having this conversation with me and being able to connect with voters here in the community.
Absolutely. No, it's been great having you on, Royden. We love to hear from guests of all kind of businesses, high performers. You've done some great things in your career, and it looks like you're headed in a way to make a difference for Canadians. And we're on the A podcast here. We couldn't be more rooting for Canada and the success from our end here. So thank you for making time, and we look forward to seeing the result on the other end here. So
okay,
awesome. Okay, we'll chat soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Stephen.
No problem.
Have a lovely one.